It could be argued that there are now three guarantees in life: death, taxes, and the rising cost of a college education. Paying for college has gotten increasingly difficult for many students and their families, as the admission price to a four-year university keeps going up year after year. It is estimated that college tuition over the past 20 years has jumped more than 130%, well above the rate of inflation. In order to afford a college education, more and more students have been forced to take out student loans. Upon graduation, about 2/3 of college students are faced with an average student loan debt of $29,000. So why is this college education so expensive? Before we begin our discussion on this edition of The Professors, let's take a look at a student-produced story on how the rising cost of tuition is affecting them.
For what I'm going to school for, I say about another 4 more years. Roughly about, I say about 30,000.
2/3 of college graduates in the U.S. leave school with a degree and a student loan debt of about $29,000.
My last alternative is taking out a loan, because I definitely don't want to take out a loan, because I think that's just a setup from day one, because when you get out of school, you take out all these loans, and when you get out, you have to pay them back.
The collective student loan debt in the U.S. has now reached $1 trillion.
It's already hard trying to go to school and trying to maintain a job as well. And then it's like, as soon as you're finished, it's like, okay, now, where's the money?
Public university tuition jumped 8.3% this fall and has gone up faster than the rate of inflation in the last 5 years. Some experts say the rising cost of education could have an adverse effect on America's overall quality of life.
I think it could be devastating and could, in fact, send us into the second tier of industrial societies.
The cost of a full credit load at a public university has passed the $8,000 mark. Private schools are much higher, and that doesn't even include books. However, many students feel it's the price they have to pay in order to be a success.
Education is an investment, and you have to make an investment if you want to make some of your life. However, I mean, that is a pretty steep price to pay for education, but I mean, in order to get the best education, you have to pretty much be in debt.
President Obama is pushing a plan that will let some borrowers lower their federal student loan payments starting next year, but some wonder if it goes far enough.
I think it's a beginning. It's doing what the government is able to do without congressional support. I think it's really tinkering around the edges of the problem.
Meanwhile, more than 100 colleges in the U.S. now charge $50,000 or more for tuition, fees, room, and board, widening the gap between the haves and the have-nots. Reporting for The Professors on WYCC, I'm Erica Hoke.
We examined the rising cost of higher education, its causes and consequences today on The Professors.
From across the city and the 7 city colleges of Chicago, broadcasting from 63rd and Halsted at Kennedy King College. Professors take the art of conversation to a higher degree.
Joining us today are Professors William Settles from Truman College, Temple Hemphill from Kennedy King College, and Ted Williams, also from Kennedy King College. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, one of the things that we're aware of at the present moment is that there is a rising cost of higher education. As the intro spoke to, it's increased by leaps and bounds, sure, even compared to 5 or 10 years ago, when many of us were undergraduates. What has characterized this higher expense of four-year education and higher education in general?
I would say, although you've been very generous to us in our ages, so I appreciate that. You know, I was an undergrad 5 years ago. You can believe that if you want, but thank you, Rashid. But I would say that what has happened internationally, which is very scary if you think about it, is that the United States has gone from number 1 to number 10 in the number of people who are getting college degrees. And this has happened in the last 20, 30 years as college costs have gone up. And as they've gone up, and I've read 100%, 150%, I've read 300%, what is happening is incomes have really stayed the same. And so cost of colleges are going up, the incomes are staying the same, the number of jobs that require college degrees are not going up either. And so we have this real challenge and this real problem. And so this, I think, and with us being in college education ourselves, is a really important question. And I really think that we've got to start to look at public policy about fixing this issue.
And when we talk about the public sector, one of the reasons that we know that the cost of college education is increasing for students and their families is because states can't contribute to those costs as much as they could in previous years or generations. And so to that extent, and of course coupled with the fact that more households don't have the stream of incomes to support or balance out this rising cost, what can we expect in the future in regards to households and students gaining access to higher education? Any perspective on that?
Well, there are a couple of trends that we see. I mean, you're quite correct that the states are not, whether they can or choose not to, providing the support. So tuitions in public institutions not only are increasing, but they're increasing as a share of total revenue. Colleges are depending more and more on the tuition, but that is simply filling a gap. It's not adding to their ability to provide services. What we can expect is entirely dependent on public policy and whether revenues in the public sector increase. But in the private sector, obviously, if incomes stagnate and unemployment does not decrease significantly, we can't expect this problem to go away. The one thing that it may happen, which might strongly affect this, is a decreasing demand for college education as more people simply choose not to attend.
Sure.
So let's get to that point then, okay? So let's say there is a decreased demand for college education, or if there's a choice that has to be made between high indebtedness or just foregoing a college education. From that perspective, what would that mean for the future of our nation?
Oh, it's going to, of course, just dramatically impact us in a negative way. We cannot be a global leader if we are not producing educated people. Now, some of the smartest folks I know do not hold a degree in the technical sense. So let me be clear that just whether you've earned an associate's degree or four-year degree or law degree, professional degree, it doesn't, it shows discipline. I always say earning a degree or degrees show discipline.
Very good.
And, but I also tell my students, though experience is good, the paper stands.
Very good.
So that's the flip side.
Yeah.
And because of that, then we won't be a global leader if we don't have the paper behind us.
And you know, last week the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, they released a study that showed that the United States of America, in terms of educating its populace, is near the bottom quintile of, amongst global nations. And so it's very scary that that deficit seems to be, in the future, we can expect it to be exacerbated just a bit.
Absolutely.
So that seems like a pretty serious problem, yes?
Well, yes and no. In terms of the impact on the quality of life of American citizens generally, it could be a very negative thing if we continue with the same set of beliefs about the paper and its objective value. But one of the interesting facts that's being argued largely in the tech sector is that there is a global population of people who are able to fulfill jobs. And in fact, globally, the computer programmers and engineers are outpacing the number produced here in this country. So, and they're lobbying very strongly for I think it's the B1 or H1 visa program. So,
Are you talking about offshoring?
No, onshoring, really increasing migration, or at least visas for people to come in and do the jobs.
But it also sounds like you're saying that we ought to reevaluate what kinds of education I think our students are getting. And so we see that, you know, the reality is, and I read this as well, I think this is interesting, we have more fitness science majors than we have physical science majors in America.
Did you just hear that on NPR? It was
actually,
a report
well, I didn't
on
hear
NPR.
I
Okay,
actually heard it somewhere else. And we have more psychology majors than we have engineering majors. And so what we see is that people are getting college degrees. 30% of our population now has a college degree. but those college degrees are not necessarily in areas that translate into jobs. We have about 50,000 people that graduate from law school each year with about 30,000 jobs to offer them. And so as he's talking, I think that maybe what we need to reevaluate is the kind of education that we're providing, because the reality is that is the real problem of global competition.
But it's not the kind of education we provide. The options are there. It is whether we are going to manage the education system as is characteristic of some Scandinavian countries, Germany and Britain, where by the age of 15, your future is laid out for you. And you've been tested, and we've looked at the national need for people, and the government picks winners and losers, and then we program young people into the education that they're suited for to meet national needs.
But I would disagree.
That's not been our
but I would
approach
disagree
in
with
this
the
country.
idea that the option is always there, because while the option may be there on paper, if you look at large sectors of our communities in this country, engineering is not necessarily an option if you've had poor math and science education all the years leading up to college, and so. The option may not be as there or open as we may believe.
Well, now we're talking about the whole arrangement of education going down to the next levels, which determine what people want to do in college, which is also what they don't know about the labor markets, and the skills that they have that allow them to get into one program and not into another. So again, you could look at, if you're looking at the national picture outside of strategic industries and defense related areas where clearance and security clearances are necessary, we could probably get a lot of our engineering and scientific personnel from other countries.
And what we are now, I would argue, and that's a real problem.
Well,
I mean, I went to the University of Illinois' engineering graduation a year ago, and I realized that, and this is anecdotal at best, but I would probably argue that there was probably 80–90% of people who graduated were foreign born.
That would be the case.
And so, I mean, this is not a good thing necessarily.
It's also cultural in terms of, I have lots of friends who are African, from an African country, different African countries, and sciences and math are just more respected in terms of an education, while we are sort of spoiled in the U.S. Because we can become artists. I'm a writer, a freelance writer, so I can do the whole bohemian type of living and teach as well. And that's not always highly respected. It's not even respected sometimes in many cultures. So that's one thing to look at. It's a matter of values and what's respected and not.
But I'm not advocating for a command and control system. I'm simply stating what I perceive to be cultural and economic realities. If our definition of what is in the national interest means what is in the interest of this abstract thing called the United States, which may turn out to be the interest of the ruling elites, then it doesn't really matter where we get the person power from, as long as we have it. If we're talking about national interest as the interest of the people, the 300-odd million people living here, who are Americans for whom the system should be responsible, then that's a quite different thing.
And I think we are.
Okay, well, then I think we've got to deal with which model we want. Do we want the free choice model, which we've been pushing? Everybody should and can go to college and do whatever they want. But does that then imply that if that's what you want to do, you should pay for it? Or if we're looking for more support, aren't we also saying that the demand will determine what we create opportunity and fund people for, and that you may not have the government or some other entity supporting you to go into a field for which there is no clear demand, or for which talent rather than demand makes the difference. Now, that's a fundamental philosophical and political question.
But here's what's happening in that, and I think what you're speaking to is a very important point. The government is subsidizing education heavily. We spend over $100 billion on federal financial aid alone. And so, obviously, as educators ourselves, we want people to have more access to education. But the reality is that sort of fuels this cost issue. Because if the government's going to subsidize it and pay for it, then college institutions have no incentive to bring their costs down.
No, they do not. And I think that's a really good segue to the essential point, because I think the thing that we can agree to, and what college presidents in the Pew Center research poll talked about, over 1/3 of college presidents say that higher education is headed in the wrong direction. 20% say that the U.S. In terms of higher education is the best in the world. So there is a very clear perspective being offered that there needs to be a recalibration of the higher education model, and also a recalibration of the American dream. But when we talk about costs, just costs in and of itself, in terms of right now, we were previously talking about the future state. If we look at the current state, and what Moody's talked about in their research is the fact that there is the potential for a speculative bubble when it comes to student loan debt, right? So today, what we can find is that with so many factors, a confluence of so many factors, unemployment, the housing market, which of course usurped a lot of the resources that households could use to pay for education, the fact that the cost of education is increasing like it is, this is potentially going to lead to a situation where not only are households not going to be able to afford education, but then the financial system, the U.S. economy, is going to bear the brunt of another financial disaster embedded in this, of course, the student loan crisis. What can we do about that in the here and now? What sort of remedies might we be able to put in place to address that issue?
We're talking about the income-based repayment program. It started in 2007. It started during the Bush administration, and now it has just been revised by the Obama administration. And basically there is depending on your income, that your income determines how much you will pay back. There's a cap. So when it started in 2007, the cap was 15%, and after 25 years, your debt is forgiven, would be forgiven. Now, with the revised plan, it caps off at 10% of your income, so it's lower, and I believe 20%, 20 years, after 20 years, your loans are forgiven after 20 years.
Oh, wow.
And so that's huge, but here's the catch. You have to qualify based on your income. So then we play the numbers game.
course.
What determines if I can really afford to pay 10% of my income. Right. Maybe I'm working, maybe my husband's working, but we're taking care of his family or his unemployed sister or someone, right? Yeah. So the numbers, that's still, it's still not.
And what she's speaking to is a real situation. The average student has, $25,000, $27,000 in debt. This story, I tell my students all the time, this blows me away. Bill Clinton did not pay off his student loans until he got into the White House. Barack Obama did not pay off his student loans until he had written his book while he was running for president and had enough money. Right. So I tell my students, unfortunately, it feels like you have to doggone near become the president of the United States in order to pay off these loans. And I'm speaking as someone who has loans. It's an onerous responsibility or burden, if you will, because so many of us are facing this, and that is because there is this sort of cultural push towards college education, which I think is good, but we've got to figure out how to make sure that students get down on these costs, and that program sounds like it's very effective in doing that.
But what about the folks who cannot, who don't meet these guidelines, and so they don't qualify for this?
Well, also, I mean, you're talking about an increasing privatization of the student loan market, which means it's a for-profit enterprise.
Correct.
But in terms of its effect on people, I mean, the statistics indicate the obvious, that the lower your income, the greater the percentage of your income will go to the repayment of loans. Since it is not really, the loans are not made on as a percentage of your income, they're made on the basis of how much you need to go to college. And for a person who's not making much money, they're simply going to have more of it committed to their debt. But the other side is, and you made this interesting statement that it's predicted that we may see this bubble. It's already happening. It is the current bubble, and it is going to go boom. And the interesting thing, we were kicking around earlier, it's interesting because so you default. They can't repossess your education.
Correct.
Yeah. And that's going to be an interesting phenomenon. But of course, we can also expect some kind of bailout of the banks in this area as
Well, I
well.
hope they build
So I
but
don't-
not the
on this,
bailout
yeah.
necessarily of the debtors.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay, so the poor student who is now a graduate and working may see that
Yeah.
the system will survive,
Yeah.
but that person's own economic future will be as perilous as ever.
Go ahead, Ted. I'm sorry.
Well, I was going to say, you know, there's this movement now also that is really challenging the conventional notion that college education is necessary. The founder of PayPal, I just attended a debate on this question, whether college education is too expensive, and the founder of PayPal started this movement where he's paying students not to go to college. And he's basically saying that if you are an entrepreneur, I will give you $100,000 and you can spend 3 years building your business, et cetera, et cetera. This is a very interesting kind of approach to this because I come from a family of entrepreneurs. My dad did not finish college, but is very successful. I was telling you before we started taping, when we go out of town, he pays, not me, and I'm the one with all the education because I can't afford it, you know, I gotta pay his loans back. So there is this idea, and I think we talked about this earlier, college is not necessarily for everyone. And I think we've got to, even in this setting, open up the conversation to include that.
And I think that idea or this framework that you were exposed to at the conference you attended, as well as the IBR paradigm, is something that begins to address the issue. And we're not turning our eyes away from the issue. We're trying to confront it on some level. But you guys mentioned a very important group of individuals who are located within this issue, and that's entrepreneurs. And of course, we know that entrepreneurs and small businesses especially are the primary catalyst for job creation. And Temple, I know before the show, we talked a bit about the impact that this particular cost issue would have on entrepreneurship and the ability for these very energetic, bright entrepreneurial individuals to actually catalyze economic growth and job development. Can you help us add some perspective to that?
Sure, and it's to add to what you're saying, Ted. It is often the creative minds are the ones to create PayPal and Facebook and what have you. However, it's hard to be creative when you're worried about rent being paid and your mortgage. So there are, and if you don't have stable income, because you are living as an entrepreneur, it is more challenging to receive traditional loans and credit cards to provide a safety net.
Sure.
If you're okay with that.
We'd be very hypocritical if we all sat here and said no one should go to college, and all of us have multiple
Just like
degrees.
the individuals on that panel you
Right, exactly, which I didn't disclose, but I will. The founder of PayPal graduated from Stanford Law School, so, you know.
Oh, he did?
He did. Yes, he did.
Okay,
Yeah,
oh,
so,
got it, okay.
So he did, but I mean, I don't defend his position, but he argued that, you know, as he was hiring people in Silicon Valley, he was really looking for people who could do things.
That reality is so not the
No, I know, and
reality.
especially
and it's not at you.
No,
but
I got you. I get you.
I enjoy that kind of perspective,
Yeah.
but it's just not realistic for someone coming out of Inglewood to not have safety net. So I agree.
It is a safety net.
A 2-year degree or 4-year degree may not be for everyone, but I say get some paper, get in the sense of get certified to do something.
It's a safety net, but the question is at what cost? I think that's what the real issue is. Yes, it's a
We
safety
can't
net.
afford
Yes,
not-
I'm all for it. But my goodness, being strapped with $30,000 of debt when you start your life off is horrible.
What about just a certification? So I'm saying even beyond earning an associate's degree, how about promoting become certified as a carpenter? That is what I'm promoting.
And I think the thing
become
that-
certified. You need some
I
kind
agree,
of paper.
and city colleges is a great.
Right,
place
the
for it.
ComEd
It's a
great
program,
low-cost
actually,
option.
that's
Various
through Dawson.
programs.
ComEd has a wonderful
Health
program.
services, of course, in manufacturing. There's a lot of different programs that we offer where certification is important. And right now we are doing some analyses
And
on the
I believe
returns
in that
to
fully.
an investment in those certifications.
Sure.
So that's very important as
Well,
well.
you see, as I think about it, the big secret that is withheld from children in school, and particularly in high school, but also in college, is what one can do to earn a living in the United States of America.
That's an excellent point.
And the labor market is a big secret. One sort of stumbles across people doing jobs and discover that the job exists, that the job pays a middle class, allows one to have a middle class lifestyle, and that the job is learned through an apprenticeship program or through some other means. The people that work in certain industries where there are occasionally shortages, at the same time are not eager to bring in competition for themselves, so that the secret becomes a conspiracy between those who control the jobs, those who have the jobs, and the broad ignorance of the educators who know about things that you learn in school. And if it's a job that you don't learn by virtue of a program in a high school or college, most of the time we don't know about it. And we need people to break open that chest of secrets.
But we assume the educators have that information too.
No, why should we?
Which, I mean, we shouldn't. They should have it, but I don't assume that they have that information to provide because, I hate to say this, many educators are struggling financially as well and haven't figured out how to make the labor market work for them.
That's exactly right.
But I think it's more fundamental than that. Look, we know about the realm of work that is done primarily by people with college training. We don't know, unless it is through our personal experience or just sort of looking at people doing construction down the street from us, what jobs are obtained through apprenticeships, through company training programs, what kind of technologies you don't learn in college, but people obviously are taught and use.
I mean, I think I think we don't know about either, to be honest. I mean, I don't know if it's necessarily that we don't know about those or the other, but I mean, I agree with your overall point. I think we just don't know, period. Whether it's college or not, we just don't, and that's a problem.
And it seems like there has to be another discussion, a more robust discussion around this issue, an educative process to educate about education. I mean, it seems to be that needs to be where the direction is going. In a couple of seconds, might you each offer a perspective about the one overriding issue within the context of everything we discussed that needs to be addressed first in order to deal with this cost of education?
Sure. I would say college is expensive. I think that people need to search for different options to get college education. It's a plug for city colleges. I would suggest this is a very good low-cost option for folks. College is good, especially coming out of communities like the one we work in. You need that degree. College graduates still make twice as much as high school graduates on average, and yet still, we've got to figure out ways to do it without strapping on so much debt.
Very good. Temple.
Right. My cousin's now a veterinarian doctor, and he started at a 2-year college, junior community college in California, and went on to become a vet doctor. And so this junior college system can work, saved his mother a lot of money, and it helped him get some discipline and focus.
10 seconds, Professor Settles.
We need to decide what we as a nation want in terms of skills and economic well-being for our people. And we need to decide then what it takes to have what we used to call the middle-class standard of living. If it's college, okay, used to be something else. Now we've raised it up to college. I can see it being raised up to something else later. I think we need to look at the whole picture of our economy, and if our goal is middle-class standard of living, let's get there.
I think the thing we all can agree on is that the community college is a good place, a good alternative that is viable given the circumstances we just described.
I've worked in the system for 40 years. I think definitely it is a winning alternative.
We'll get there someday.
Cool.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.
The conversation about how to pay for a college education is one that Americans will be having for years to come. But the conversation about what to pay for a college education is just as necessary in our society. Most universities are public institutions accountable to voters. Let's take a look at the bill before we argue about how to split it. For the professors, I'm Rashid Carter. Thank you for watching.